All right, we need to get started here. Good evening. While they're trickling in, it's supposed to be in here, not out there. That's because you weren't in here. All right, couple of announcements. This Sunday at 5, 5 o'clock, 4:30. What time do we sit there? 5 o'clock. Youth planning meeting, Sunday at 5 o'clock in the fellowship hall. This Saturday, there's a birthday. Anybody want to claim it? Saturday is Miss Sue's birthday. And so we would like to do a drive-by happy birthday greeting to Miss Sue at, what did you say, 5 o'clock? Meet at church at 5 o'clock? Meet here at the church at 5 o'clock Saturday. And then we're going to go down and we have to do that because we have to let her know that we're coming so she'll be at the door. But so let's plan to be here at 5 o'clock Sunday afternoon, and we'll drive down and wave to her, sing happy birthday to her, and give her her greetings. Let's see, any other announcements? All right, do we have any prayer requests? Well, from what I hear, it's your fault. She did, Lisa talked to her earlier, and she did say to tell everybody hello, but she is going to be in the hospital for a few days. So let's do keep Louise in your prayers. And she says she loves everybody, and we love her too. So. All right, Miss Elner. Also, I was being nice. No, I just wondered if it was affecting your speech any, but also, David Garrett was involved in an accident yesterday, I believe it was. That is Diane Reed's brother, Richard Garrett's brother. Huh? Yeah. No, this side of it. Right there on the right. Yeah, before you get to Earl's. Yeah. So I really need to keep him in your prayers. Also, the Tim Jackson family. That's Brother Harold and Miss Carolyn's son, Tim. He passed away. So you need to remember them in your prayers. And Lisa's cousin Ginger came through her surgery well. Everything is looking good. So do continue to pray for her for healing. Any others? Mm-hmm. You do not. Just meanness, huh? Just meanness? All right, any others? I just alluded to it. On that one, I think we need to go to prayer. Brother Kenny, would you lead us in prayer, please? Amen. Let's go to class. Good for, okay. Okay, who remembers what we talked about last week? First sin in particular. That's the key. As the question that we're talking about is what's the problem with sin? And I gave a definition, 2 words really, very, very detailed definition. Does anybody remember what that definition was? Well, that was original. Come on now. I thought I meant something. I said one and Kenny said the other. Willful and original. So we talked about that first sin when Adam and Eve disobeyed God's law. That would be what kind of sin? Willful. That was the willful sin. They knew what God said not to do, but they did exactly what God said not to do. That was a willful sin. As a result of that, sin entered into creation. We talked a little bit about what happened after that. That's where I want to kind of pick up and go into a little more detail there and then move forward. When Adam sinned, What besides sin entered into the world? Death. So sin and death entered into the world when Adam sinned. When they hid and God confronted them, after God asked them the questions and they answered the questions, what did God do in order to cover their sins? He had or killed an animal and took the skins to cover their nakedness or cover their sin, as it were. And so the blood, the shedding of blood then, was that symbolized that the shedding of blood is required in order for sin to be atoned. In Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, we have the first messianic prophecy. Besides Kenny, who can tell me what that prophecy was? Kenny? When God was pronouncing the curse on the serpent was, "You shall bruise his heel, but he will bruise your head." And that is a prophecy that Satan would kill or would have Jesus killed, but that Jesus would overcome by being raised from the dead. So Genesis 3:15 is considered the first messianic prophecy. If you ever see that in a quiz sometime, you'll know what that is now. What was the curse on the women as a result of their sin? Pain during childbirth. Sounds like a voice of experience. What was the curse for men? I thought he had to put up with Eve. Oh. The curse then on the men was brambles and thistles, thorns, weeds, all those fun things that when you plant a garden, they grow up in the garden, and if you're not careful, they'll take over your garden. And by the sweat of his brow, he would till the ground. Implication there is that he didn't sweat before that. Interesting. Didn't have to. And all he had to do was just go up to the tree and pick the fruit and eat it. It was all right there. And then they were excommunicated. They were kicked out of Eden, no longer able to live in paradise. As a result of that, all of creation groans for redemption. In fact, that's one of the prophecies looking towards the end times. We find that the creation is groaning, waiting for the return of Christ and the ultimate redemption of creation. That's prophesied. I'll go ahead and tell you what book it is, 2 Peter. Does anybody know what chapter and verse? Anybody know what chapter it might be? Chapter 3. Very good. Anybody know what verse it might be? Anybody know what verse it might be? Benjamin, tell them what verse it is. Verse 8. Chapter 3, verse 8. I kind of confused y'all on that. See, I'll go ahead and let me explain that. On the flight deck of an aircraft carrier, you only have one hand that's free. And when you have to tell a number, I don't know if you've ever been on the flight deck of an aircraft carrier, but you can shout as loud as you want to and nobody's going to hear it. So they have to use hand signals. And so the signals are, for 3, it's this way. If it's 8, it's sideways. So if it's the number sideways, just add 5 to it, and that tells you what the number is. And that's how you are able to signal numbers. 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 8. Peter says that the earth is going to be, actually says creation, but the earth in particular is going to be dissolved with a fervent heat. Now, let me go ahead and get into that because these words are important. Will be important a little bit later on. Another word, the word that's used there is also translated destroyed. And in fact, some translations will say that the earth is going to be destroyed with a fervent heat. There are two words primarily that are used in the Greek that are translated destroyed. And those two words, the best way to explain it is to describe it. So if I'm going to, let's say I have some paper boxes, and I want to destroy those with one of the words. I light a match to it, and I burn those things up, and they're destroyed. They're gone. They're nothing left but ashes. They're completely gone. They're completely destroyed. That's one way, one word. The other word is, I take these boxes, and I decide I'm going to destroy the boxes, and so I tear the boxes up. I keep the cardboard, and I refashion the cardboard to make something else out of it. I destroyed the boxes. They're no longer boxes, but the cardboard was used to manufacture or to make something else. That's the word that's used in 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 8. The implication there is that God's going to take the creation as it is and purify it with fire and bring it back to its original created state. Only God can do that. That other word's going to come into play a little bit later on when we talk about original sin. So let's get back to Genesis. Adam and Eve were removed from the garden because of their sin. Because of Adam's sin, we talked some about this last week. Paul refers to this in the book of Romans. He talks about how because of one man's sin and one man's death that we all sin, that we all die. And that is called original sin. That's the sin that's passed on to us by birth because of who we are. We're all born with original sin. So, let me ask a question on that now. If all mankind is born with original sin, how was it that Jesus was not? How was it that Jesus was not born with original sin? Because remember, Scripture says that he was without sin. Because his father was not a man. I don't remember. There's several different theories as to how all that works, and depends on which theologian or which writer you listen to. But I think the simplest way to understand it is that it's transmitted through man. And because Jesus' father was God and his mother was Mary, he was man, but he was God. So, original sin is transmitted to us through birth. As we look in the Old Testament, there are a couple of events that take place that help to understand the seriousness of sin, or to answer or to speak to the question, what's the problem with sin? Let's go to Genesis chapters 6 through 8. A very familiar story takes place there, and it involves a man, 120 years, and a boat. Who are we talking about? Noah. Noah built a boat. How does God describe mankind in that section as the reason for the building of the ark? Man was wicked and his thoughts were evil continually. You know, when you look at that, and then the other one we'll talk about in a moment for just a second is Sodom and Gomorrah, and then we look at our world today. Where are we? No, I think you get the picture. So Noah built the ark, and God had Noah get on the ark along with his family, his immediate family, 3 sons, 3 daughters-in-law, and his wife. And then Noah closed the door of the ark, right? God sealed the door of the ark. Why do you think that is? Yeah, that's a plausible explanation. So just maybe if Noah had closed it when he heard everybody outside screaming and hollering and banging on the door, he would have been inclined to open the door to let them in. He had family members out there, right? But there's another reason, and this is probably the more accurate reason. The ark is a symbol or a type of Christ because it's a type of salvation. And God sealed the ark, symbolizing that He's the one who provides the salvation, and that salvation is only possible through His methods. And so the ark is a symbol of the salvation that Christ would provide. We go on down a little ways to Sodom and Gomorrah, and God brought judgment on Sodom and Gomorrah. This one's a little different because God told Abraham that he was going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah and that he would save Lot. But Abraham pled for Sodom and Gomorrah, did he not? He tried to save them. And he started out with, 100 people? You know, God, if there's 100 righteous men, will you save it? And God said, sure. And Abraham thought about it and he said, there ain't 100 righteous men in Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay, how about 50? How about 20? One more time, God, how about if you find 10 righteous men? And I think that God's words were probably stated with finality. You know how sometimes when somebody says something and they state it and you know that that's it, they're not going any further. And Abraham knew that God wasn't going any further, but there weren't 10 righteous men to be found. And so judgment was brought on them. There's a picture, a word picture in the New Testament that follows that example. It's found in the book of Jude. And Jude talks about the judgment of God being like the billows of the sea. And he talks about a dam that's holding back, kind of like a dike that's holding the sea back. That he describes as the mercy of God. The similarity, or I guess you could call it the similarity, the picture that he's painting there is a reminder of Sodom and Gomorrah and Abraham pleading for the people there. The dike or the dam that's holding back God's judgment are the symbolic 10 righteous men in the world. Now, obviously it's more than that. We don't know what that number is, only God does. But he has this number that's set, and as long as we exceed that number with the number of righteous men who are working to bring salvation to the world, then God's judgment is being held back. But once that number is reached, and we fall below that number, the dam is going to give, and God's judgment will come in. And that's one of the pictures that we find there. And so when we talk about what's the problem with sin, those two examples in the Old Testament show us that God does not take sin lightly. The destruction of all the people, with the exception of Noah and his family, that's pretty extreme, we would think. But then when you look at the description, I think it's is it chapter 7, verse 1, or 8, verse 8, 1, somewhere through there anyway. It describes what the world is like, and the words that God uses there. You realize it was really bad. I mean, that's the way it was. And then when we go to Sodom and Gomorrah and we look at the picture there, even that night when the two angels went to save Lot and his daughters, and we saw what happened there, how the people of Sodom and treated them. And so we get an understanding then of why God's judgment came upon them. So sin is serious business. Sin is destructive. Sin brings death. It brings death to those who commit the sin, and also that is the end result. So therefore then, and God gave us this picture in the book of Genesis, that death is required in order to overcome or to cover sin. So now we go to Moses. Moses is also a type of Christ, by the way. There's a lot of pictures of Christ throughout the Old Testament. I'm not going to try to list all of them, but as we look at it and understand that these pictures are not meant to say this is exactly what Christ is like, but rather that he's symbolic of the salvation that Christ would provide. For example, Moses led the children of Israel out of Egypt, brought them through the Red Sea, and that brought deliverance. That deliverance is a symbol of what Christ does. Egypt is a type or a picture of sin. The Red Sea would be a picture or a type of salvation, that when Moses brought them through the Red Sea, that he saved them, if you want to use those terms. But the important thing about Moses, as far as what we're discussing here, is when Moses went up on the mountain, God gave him the 10 Commandments, but he gave him something else. He gave him what is known as the Levitical law. The Levitical law is the process or the all of the sacrificial system that was required. But let me back up to Egypt for just a second, because we get kind of a preliminary picture of it there. How many plagues did God bring on Egypt? Ten plagues. What was the 10th plague? Death of the firstborn for all of Egypt. Now it's interesting, when God brought the plagues, the first 4 plagues, I think it was, affected everybody in Egypt, including the children of Israel. The next 6 plagues only affected, the next 5 plagues only affected the Egyptians. Did not affect the children of Israel in the land of Goshen. The 10th plague, death, affected anyone who did not meet a certain criteria. The criteria was that they had to take a lamb that was pure, without blemish. They had to kill the lamb. They had to take blood, and with hyssop they had to put it on the doorposts and on the lintel. So when you look at it, then you have on the doorpost and on the lintel forms that of a cross. And God said that the death angel was going to visit Egypt that night. And he would go to the door, and if he did not see the blood on the door, then the death angel would visit that house, and the firstborn in that house would die. If the blood was on the doorpost, then the death angel would pass over that house. Have you ever heard of Passover? It's a familiar term, isn't it? It's a festival, if you will, that the Israelites celebrated from that time forward at God's command, that they were supposed to celebrate the Passover because of that. When did Jesus die? On Passover. Wow. How about that? You think that just happened that way? Nothing just happens in God's plan of events. What does hyssop look like? You know what broom sage is? Something kind of like that. It was kind of a thick weed, basically. But when you dipped it in water or blood or something like that, they would soak it up so that you could sprinkle it. In fact, hyssop is what was used for baptism during that time. When priests were brought into the priesthood, they were baptized with hyssop, and it was actually a water baptism that symbolized the cleansing. And I won't go down that road anyway. Well, yeah. Okay. Since you brought it up, when John baptized, what was John's baptism for? It's not a good way of asking the question. Let's see. Why did John baptize the people that came to him? For the remission of sins, and that's what we're told throughout his ministry. He baptized people for the remission of sins. Okay. Question then. Why did he baptize Jesus? If he was baptizing for the remission of sins, why did he baptize Jesus? It's not a trick question. Jesus was entering into his ministry. Remember who John's father was? John's father was a priest. And so a priest would baptize another priest to induct him into the ministry. And so when Jesus came to John for baptism, remember John's first words. John's response first was, "Oh no, I can't baptize you." What John is saying is, you haven't sinned. There's no need for me to baptize you. But Jesus said, "Yes, John, you do need to baptize me. Not for that, but for this." And so John's baptism of Jesus was not for the remission of sins, but rather to begin his ministry on this earth as a priest after the order of Melchizedek. I won't get too far into that one, but let me just add one more thing. If John was a priest and he baptized the way the priest did, what do you think John did? He dipped the hyssop and sprinkled. Thank you. Moving on. Let me get back to the Old Testament. So, Moses then, God gave Moses the Levitical law. And in the Levitical law, beginning with the Passover and then the other, the atonement sacrifices for atonement, the sin sacrifices and all the various sacrifices that they had to make, everything was done with precise detail. It had to meet certain criteria, and they had to do it the same way, and they had to do it every year. Because the same reason that when Adam and Eve sinned and God killed the animals, it was a symbol, or it was symbolic of the covering of sin. And so the blood of animals could only cover sin, or more precisely, cover the effects of sin. And so it had to be repeated every year because it was not able to truly atone for sin. However, when we look at the Levitical law, and we look at the various sacrifices, especially with the atonement, like I mentioned a moment ago, it all pointed to the work that was going to be done by the Messiah. And so throughout the Old Testament, then we hear the various prophecies of the Messiah that's coming and everything that's to be done, but it all pointed to a better way. The book of Hebrews explains this in detail. In fact, the key word, if you were to take one word as a key word for the book of Hebrews, it's the word better. And the writer of Hebrews, I prefer Paul, but whomever it was, shows how the Old Testament law and the Old Testament sacrificial system, even the priesthood of the Old Testament, pointed to the work of the Messiah and how it would be, and how it was fulfilled, or how it was accomplished in the person of Jesus Christ. And Jesus fulfilled everything to a T. Everything that was prophesied, everything that was said, Jesus did. And so Jesus then was able to come, and when he died, his death became the atonement for sin. Paul emphasizes the point that when Jesus died, he died once for sin. That was it. That's all he had to do, because he was the perfect sacrifice. He was the perfect sacrifice because he was God, he was man, he was sinless. And therefore, when he died on the cross of Calvary, he died as a perfect human being, perfect in the sense that he was sinless, and was able thus to perfectly atone for sin, or completely atone for sin. A couple of statements on the cross that helps to emphasize, again, the severity of, or the how bad sin is. First of all, when Jesus was first raised up on the cross, what were the first words that Jesus spoke from the cross? Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Father, forgive them. He looked down at those that were putting him on the cross. Now, do you think he was just talking about the soldiers? He was talking about everybody that put him up there, including the priests who knew exactly what they were doing. But he still, or at least they thought they knew. Which one was it? Caiaphas made the prophetic statement the night before. No, it wasn't the night. Yeah. It was earlier in the week, wasn't it, when he said that it was necessary for one man to die for the sins of all? And he said that of Jesus. It was a prophetic statement. I don't think he realized what he was saying exactly at the time. Yeah. But later on, he'd look back at it and he'd think about what he said time and time again, I think. When the veil, yeah. Mm-hmm. When Jesus was on the cross, he made another statement that was significant. my God, why have you forsaken me? What is God's view of sin? He can't look on sin. Remember the flood? Remember Sodom and Gomorrah? When Jesus was on the cross, the sin of the world, meaning the sin of all mankind, was placed on his shoulders. Symbolically. They didn't come actually put him there, but our sin was placed on his shoulders. What did the Father have to do when the sins of mankind were placed on his Son? He had to look away because he cannot look on sin. And so when he did, the Son felt it and knew at that precise instant. He experienced the sin of the world, that sin that he had never himself experienced. And he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? And what happened then? It's finished. Father, into thy hands I commit my spirit. And he died. When the soldier thrust the spear into his side, doctors tell us that the reason that blood and water flowed from his side is because he died of a broken heart. It wasn't crucifixion that killed Jesus. It was our sins. Again, the question, what's the problem with sin? It's why it's so important that we recognize sin is not to be taken lightly. Sin is not a joke. Sin's not something that that we just kind of hem-haw around and say that, it's not really that big of a deal. If it caused Jesus to die on the cross with a broken heart, then don't you think that's a pretty serious thing? So what's the problem with sin? Sin separates from God. Sin brings death. And so something has to be done about it. Jesus did that on the cross. We're going to stop here for tonight. We'll pick up here next time. Any questions about what we covered tonight? We'll actually go into more detail on that next time. Let me add another word to it for you to consider. Propitiation. They're actually synonymous. All right, if all hearts and minds are free, let's stand. Bobby, would you dismiss us in prayer, please?